Welcome into the 2021 Top Buffs Countdown. Brian, we've been doing this for a number of years now. It's kind of fun. A lot of times our list is pretty good, but there's always going to be guys that surprise us. And so we'll kind of talk about that here as we get into the honorable mention group, which is the biggest group of honorable mention guys we've ever had. And part of that is that with the transfer portal, I decided we need to include those guys in the Top Buffs Countdown. In the past, we would only do guys that had been on campus for at least spring ball. This year, there's just too many guys transferring in that are going to have a huge role that we needed to include them into the top 40 countdown. How difficult or easy, I guess, what was it for you to put your list together this time around?
Yeah, I think difficult because of that, because you have all these guys coming in from the portal that we haven't seen yet, and you do expect a Max Ray to play a big role, but who knows, right? Blaine Toll, what do you expect out of him? A Tons of Vonger, what do we expect out of him? So you don't know what to expect out of these guys. So you have to kind of, try to project based on these guys have never even been on campus yet. We're trying to project them as potential impact players. So that's kind of difficult, but, not too difficult because we try to have fun with it, right? So just try to project a little bit. And inevitably, the four of us that did this, we're all going to look back and say, wow, I was way off on about 7 or 8 of these guys. And then we'll look at 7 or 8 and say, see, I told you, but it's a crapshoot with a lot of these guys. Last year, we didn't even have Jarek Broussard, and you and I were talking before this. You said that's one of the biggest surprises you've seen in all the years you've been doing this. So we're going to be way off on some guys. So don't blast us too much, but it was a little bit difficult with all these transfer guys.
In our defense, even Carl Jarrell said that Jarek Broussard really wasn't on their radar until they started preparing for the 2020 season, because they didn't have a spring ball last year, so he hadn't practiced coming off that ACL. But no, there's always going to be some guys that jump up there. In addition to us having more honorable mention guys to talk about here, there was just a wide variety of how people voted for each guys. Outside of, I think it was about the top 15. We were pretty consistent in, but beyond that, there was a lot of dissension, which I think is great for discussion. And you mentioned there was 2 other voters, Tyler Ziskin and William Gardner as well. So as we go through this, we'll talk about, hey, this is why I had him there. And then, maybe we'll get some insight from Tyler and William as well. But, let's jump into the honorable mention group here. Brian, which guys in this group were you most surprised didn't make the top 40?
Well, I had like Jalen Jackson and Daniel Arias on my list that didn't make the top 40. Both guys that I don't think are going to catch a lot of passes, but they've been 2 of the best special teams guys on this team, and so therefore I put them on the top 40 because of that. I think both of them are going to catch some passes and maybe a couple of impact passes, but I think their work on special teams warrants them being top 40. Jalen Jackson was, I believe, he was all conference, got some all conference consideration for his special teams work, and Daniel Arias has been one of the leading point getters in special teams on Dave Claddy's system for a couple of years. So I had them because of that. So they were kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, Daniel Arias is a really tough guy, and he is one of those guys that could jump in to the top 40, maybe even the top 30 if he puts it all together, because he's got all the physical tools there. Some other guys that were honorable mention, Chance Lytle, who saw some action last year coming back from a leg injury. It sounds like he's going to be ready to go by camp. Quinn Perry at inside linebacker. That's a pretty wide open competition there at inside linebacker, so we'll see you there. Jamar Montgomery and Guy Thomas, 2 outside linebackers, were part of the mix there. They were kind of eased out by an outside linebacker that had a pretty good spring. We'll talk about him later in this countdown. One guy that I kind of tried to work into the top 40, but no one else. I guess was that Tyler that put a few votes for him as well. Jaylee Stacks, he's my guy. I'm looking forward to watching him out there. I know he's not going to have a lot of carries and he's not going to have a huge role, but in those short yard situations, every time he comes out there, I'm going to be focused on him.
Yeah, and I think that was a good choice. If we had a top 41, maybe Jaylee Stacks is my number 41. He was right there for me. He was in that I wouldn't say discussion because it was just me, but he was on my list as a guy that I consider for that top 40. I think he's a guy. He got a lot of attention this spring. We'll see what kind of role he has. if he's truly going to be their short yardage type of back. And if he is, that's a great pick for you to put him in the top 40. And for Tyler, I think he had him in there. So I think he could be a top 40 guy. I just didn't have him quite there yet.
Jalen Stryker at cornerback received some votes from you. What was kind of your thinking there?
Yeah, really just kind of that depth at corner. I feel like he's going to be needed. You got to play a lot of corners in today's college football. And, Mekhi Blackman missed a lot of spring ball with some knee issues, and he's had some injury history. So I feel like he's going to be a guy that's going to be needed this year. Maybe as like a fourth corner, but, I feel like he's going to get on the field a little bit more than maybe we want to project at this point. I mean, you hope that Mekhi's healthy, that Christian Gonzalez is healthy, some of those other guys. But I feel like he'll have a bigger impact. And the other one really was Chance Lytle. He's a guy, because of injuries on the offensive line, I felt like he was a top 40 guy. I think he's going to play a lot. Carl Durrell talks about his NFL potential, that's a kid that could really play at the next level potentially. So, Colby Purcell has not played a full season since 2018. So hopefully he does now, but there's been some injuries in the interior offensive line, so I can see Chance playing a little bit more than maybe we project right now.
If we had a countdown for the best musician on the team, Chance Lytle is definitely number one on the list. I should correct myself. It was William that had Jaylee Stacks in his top 40 as well. And one guy, William, voted that no one else did into his top 40 was Caleb Fourier. And Brian, I so badly wanted to include Caleb Fourier in my top 40. I just think it's a year premature, because I think with Matt Lynch being there, even Al Capel is a guy that got some consideration here as honorable mention. You've got, of course, Brady Russell. It might just be another year before Caleb Fourier really takes that next step. I mean, you remember he didn't even get to practice with the team last year because of that leg injury. He sure was fun to watch out there in the few times we got a chance to see those open spring scrimmages.
Yeah, I mean, if we were ranking who's going to have the best careers at CU, I might have him top 40. But I agree with you. I think it's a year away for him. It's hard to project injuries on a list like this. So, everybody hopes that Brady Russell, Matt Lynch, that they're healthy all year. If they are, those are going to be the top two guys. I mean, Caleb Fourier. I keep wanting to say Christian, but Caleb Fourier, just right now, as far as blocking, things like that, he just doesn't have it yet. That's going to take another year or so for him to get that. Pass catching, I really love what we saw in the spring. I love how he runs with the ball after he catches it. I think he's going to be a really good player. I just think he is a year away. He'll be on my list next year, I believe.
And Torrin Pittman got a few votes from Tyler Ziskin. I was disappointed we didn't get to see more of him this spring, because he did get his feet wet last year in a few games as a true freshman. And they need some guys to step up there at safety. Atanza Vongar transferring in from safety doesn't make it as dire a situation there. But again, that was one of the guys I wanted to see this spring, that I think he was injured or had COVID restrictions, because I didn't really see him when we got a chance to go into those practices.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that really needed a really solid spring this year and didn't get it. So the Buffs need some depth at safety. Pittman's a guy that, he's a talented kid, and if he gets in there this fall and he's healthy and ready to go, I think he could be a top 40 guy. But again, when you look at health, there's other guys that you're kind of hoping. You're hoping Isaiah Lewis does what he does last year. You're hoping Mark Perry takes that next step and plays better than. I mean, he said to us that he didn't play very well last year. So you hope he takes that next step. If those guys do that, then I don't see like a Torrin Pittman playing a ton at safety.
Jake Wiley was on my top 40 list. He wasn't on anybody else's. He'll be part of that mix at tackle, but I think maybe with Max Ray coming in, that's why people kind of shied away from putting him in the list. But he obviously got a ton of valuable reps as a guy to keep an eye on as he continues to develop at CU. Justin Jackson got a couple of votes from Tyler Ziskin on the defensive line. Came in from the JUCO ranks last year, and we started to hear his name come up a little bit more this spring. He's a guy I think you expect to be part of that defensive line rotation, right?
Yeah, I think so. Especially, they're fairly thin at defensive line, so I think Justin Jackson could be a top 40 type of guy. Jake Wiley, I don't see it yet. I just feel like I think he's going to be a good player here, but like some of those other guys we talked about, I think he's a year away. I think that right now, as long as they're healthy, Frank Phillip and Max Ray are the tackles, and Jake Wiley. I feel like if Jake Wiley's a top 40 player this year, I think that means that there's some injuries at tackle and that things didn't go as planned for the Buffs. And that's not a knock on Jake Wiley. It just means that I think that right now Frank Phillip and Max Ray, when healthy, are further along in their development and should be the starting tackles if they're healthy.
And the other guy to mention here as honorable mention on the top 40 Buffs countdown is Austin Johnson, an offensive lineman. He was number 40 on Tyler's list. He's just been hurt for too long now. He missed all of last year due to an Achilles injury, had to have another surgery, missed spring ball. But we did hear his name come up a lot as a guy that had a lot of potential before those injuries. So hopefully he does kind of work his way back into the mix. It just seems like he's going to need maybe the fall to kind of get back to 100%.
Yeah, and I love his potential, and I think he's potentially a top 40 guy here. But I agree with you; he's got to get healthy first. And until he shows he's healthy, I can't put him on that list. I mean, I feel like 2022, 2023, maybe he's a starter, a guy in the mix here, but not this year.
Those are all the guys that were honorable mention that got votes that didn't make the top 40. Like you mentioned earlier, Jarek Broussard was not even an honorable mention guy last year. Who is a possible guy that didn't even get honorable mention that could work their way into the mix? I jotted down a few names. One guy, Brian, Marvin Ham. We saw him make a few plays in that first spring scrimmage. Again, that competition's wide open inside linebacker. He's a guy that could maybe have a role in this team. I don't know top 40, but definitely could be part of the mix.
Yeah, and I don't have my list of like who didn't make this list, but Marvin Ham is a guy that I think could be there. He was a guy that he got hit with some COVID and got hit with some injuries, but he's a guy that can be in the mix there at inside linebacker. I think there's some veterans that are ahead of him, so I understand why he's not on the list. One guy that I know running back is stacked, but a guy like Deion Smith showed some potential a couple years ago, and he's had some injuries, but he's a guy that if they've got some injuries at running back, he could be a guy if he's healthy that could work his way into that top 40 and maybe be a returner. He's a guy that could surprise a little bit. So he's one that I would look for, on that offensive side that maybe he surprises. Not a Jarek Broussard type of year, but maybe a guy that plays more of an impact than what we're thinking right now.
Yeah. A few other guys I wrote down: Carson Lee, who is going into his second year with the Buffs, took basically all the second team reps at center during spring ball. Ray Robinson, who we saw making some plays out there this spring, moving from inside linebacker to safety. Curtis Appleton gets placed on scholarship and is a pretty versatile guy there in the secondary. Trustin Oliver, how quickly does he adjust to things at this level? Trevor Woods is one guy from that 2021 class that when you watch the production that he had in high school, he seems one of the more college-ready guys. There was only one 2021 signee that made our top 40 countdown. Trevor Woods, when I look at that commitment list, is another guy that I think about.
Yeah, I think Trevor Woods has got a good future, and Trustin Oliver is one. I agree with you. He was one that when he signed, you look at that list and say, okay, who of the signees is going to play right away? And he was at the top of my list. He's a guy that I look at and say, all right, he's got some experience. He's a bigger kid, and they need help at safety. So he's one that yes, I'll probably add him on the defensive side. That he's a guy that could be a top 40 player. I love his potential. I think he was maybe swimming a little bit this last spring, like a lot of newcomers are. But I think that he's got the potential to really be a top 40 type of guy.
All right. Well, we caught our breath after spring ball, and now, Brian, we're entering those summer months, and recruiting is obviously heating up. It's going to be crazy with that here throughout the month of June, and before you know it, camp's going to get started. So it's fun to jump into this countdown. We'll be back with number 40 on our Top Buffs countdown.